I'm Wayne Cooper, and it is March 30th, 2014. I'm interviewing a longtime resident of Huntsville. Would you please introduce yourself by giving your name, age, and birthplace?
Ed Terziano, born here in Huntsville in 1920 on Susan Street, home delivery, of course, those days, and followed by a sister and a brother, sister Mary, brother Lou, and the youngest brother Albert, who still survives. And we lived there until, I lived there until I went into the service. I went to school, public and high school were all combined there just up the top of the hill. And I spent, when I went to, I originally went to North Bay. There was supposed to be four weeks of introductory training, and then you were supposed to come home again, and you could make a choice where you wanted to go. While I was there, they made it permanent. And anyway, I did the 4 weeks, and then I was sent to Petawawa. When I got over there, I had my trumpet with me, and the sergeant major said, "What's in that box?" And I said, "It's a trumpet." And he said, "I got a place for you. Come on with me." And they had just organized a band there, the Royal Canadian Engineers, and I was, placed in there. Had no choice. Anyway, I stayed there I played for 2.5 years. I was there, I guess, or maybe a little longer than that. And then I had been trying to transfer to the Air Force. I was tired of the place up there, sand all winter or all summer, and snow all winter, blowing snow. So I transferred to the Air Force. I finally got able to get out, and it took me about 14 months to train as a wireless air gunner. And when I finished the training, I was down in Prince Edward Island in January. Wild winter, like they're heavy down there now. And then we're eventually posted up to Ottawa, and when we got up there, we found there was 500 of us there, all graduates. They had overestimated, really didn't need them anymore because the war had turned its tide. And anyway, they kept us there for a while, and then they decided to send us to take Japanese, like possibility of going, to the Japanese War. And we went down to a station called Mount Hope, just out of Hamilton, about 10 miles. And we got into that training, learning Japanese aircraft, stuff like that, and went with training. Of course, then they dropped the big bomb there, and that was over. Anyway, I was finally, discharged about the end of July of '45. I come home, and I decided the military provided either a grant for property, a couple of acres of property, if you wanted, or else go to school. I decided to go to school. I went to Toronto for a year, music school, conservatory. And then I went to Kitchener for a year, conservatory. And in the summertime, I played at, there was a dance hall in Port Carling called the 21 Club. And in in 1946, I played in the band. There was a 10-piece band there, 5 or 6 nights a week, And then the following year, the owner asked me to organize an orchestra and lead it, So I organized picked him up in the Kitchener area. I was living down there. And as a sideline, or sidebar, one of the young fellas that was on saxophone, later on, after his college career finished that, he wound up as one of the 4 partners of IMAX. They had developed IMAX, and anyway, that's I got more about him later. But anyway, he we did the summer there, and I decided, I didn't want to play full time. I didn't want to try to play it, make a living out of it. I'd run into like in Toronto, there was 50 musicians for every job, and Kitchener the same way. So I thought I'd come home and I could get a job, play on the weekends. I knew I could play a lot on the weekends up here, which I did. And just about that time, well, in 1946, the Lord Greaves, a musician, and bought one of the huts down in Gravenhurst where the Norwegians had been stationed. And he transferred it, he tore it down, brought it up, and he rebuilt it out, and it was the Archway Club, of which there's a tiny piece of it. The original building is still in those Department of Highway buildings. Anyway, we played there on the weekends, in the summertime, maybe 3 times a week. And he passed away, and his wife had 3 small children, and she tried to make a go of it for a while, but she couldn't handle it, so she sold it. So then in the meantime, I'd got a job in the post office, clerking there. So I was, settled. I had a little orchestra, and we were playing at Port Sydney, Dwight, round and square dances. And then we had in 1957, we were hired to go to Highland Inn to play. It was the end of their existence. They were closing down. When we got up there that night, the train was that used to come over from Kearney was there. It was its last trip. It was kind of memorable, Anyway, we played the dance. During the dance, a lady, Mary Pigeon, who was a school teacher here in Huntsville, who had a place up there on Cache Lake, came and asked if we'd play for the Cache Lake Leaseholders Association. Wanted to have a few dances in the summer. They had a hall called the Ranger Hall there. Anyway, we took that on, and we did it for 2 summers. And memorable Art Beyond, Father, famous Jack Beyond the lacrosse player. He was our drummer, and he called for the square dancing. And piano player, we had different piano players. There's a fellow by the name of Lord Kennedy who was a piano tuner. He played the fiddle. And my brother Teen. Anyway, we did it for 2 summers. Then we decided it was too long a trip, too late getting home. We were going to work, the next morning. So we stopped there, and then we resumed playing around here. But there was a chap named Dave Whelan who was a ranger up there, and he moved into town here. And his wife was, his girlfriend was Joyce somebody, I can't remember her name. When they were married, she moved into town. She'd been working at Highland Inn. Anyway, I just resumed playing weekends whenever there was an opportunity to play, and working at the post office. And then I get into the music there when Al Willis reorganized the town band, and that was about before the war years, And he was a bachelor, and he spent all his evenings training young guys. So he had some of the older fellas from the original band, but and then we had a pretty good band, town band. Of course, when the war came along, all the young guys left, and after the war, most of them didn't come back here to live. So that's when they decided they organized. It was the same situation, Bracebridge and Gravenhurst. They decided they organized a Muskoka District Band. And it was just about then that Dr. Sargent, Lynn Sargent, moved into town, and he was a good background in music. He hadn't played for a little while, but anyway, he became the conductor. And in the meantime, we also organized a district dance band, of which there's a lot of pictures down there. He's got them on the. And we did a lot of Rotary shows every year for years. We did Rotary shows. Again, he's got a bunch of pictures down there. You might see some faces in there that you can remember. Bill Farmer, do you remember Bill Farmer? No? Well, maybe not then. Although, we did them up until, well, you weren't here. Yeah, you weren't here, so we did them up until mid-90s. And we kept the concert band. We used to do, we used to combine. We do have a program with the concert band, half with the dance band. And the last one we did was down at the Barge in Gravenhurst. I think that was about 2004. So, had a long stretch.
Indeed.
I actually started playing when I was 14. So in 2004, I was 84.
That's a long career.
I still was playing a bit, and there was a great piano player here who had retired here. He'd been here. I brought him here when this Archway Club opened. They needed a piano player. And I was living in Toronto, and I hired him to play up there. And he was here for 5 years. He married a local girl, Scriver. I don't know if that name rings a bell.
Yes.
And anyway, he went away down south, but when he retired, he come back up. And we're back in with our little 5-piece group. And we did a lot of playing until he passed away. And then I said, that's it. I sold my trumpet. And I was living in town here yet. And I said, that's it, I'm not going to play anymore. I sold it, and when it came time to move in here, I thought, geez, I got nothing to do here. And I knew that my nephew still had a trumpet. He wasn't playing in it since high school. So I called my brother and I said, can I borrow the horn? That's it over there. I started playing again. Well, then a couple of years after I was here, Dr. Sargent moved in. He hadn't played for a long time, but he dug his trumpet out. So anyway, we became the happy birthday guys here. And then we did a couple of programs, our programs here. Well, we still had access to a good piano player, and also access to this Bill Farmer, who played banjo but sang all the songs. He knew them all. And 2 years ago, Bill decided to sell his house and either move in here or move down to Ayr, Ontario, where his 2 sons live. Well, they pushed him a little bit. He went down there. So we're out of business again. So we haven't played much here now, other than, we play Valentine's Day we played. And last week there was a piano player here, and Lynn and I did half a dozen numbers with him, and we'll probably do it when they have a piano player that knows what we play.
That's wonderful, Eddie.
Yeah.
You've had a storied and well-remembered music career. I remember a number of those things that you're talking about because I've had family connections with the Archway Club myself. You were talking about my cousin who took over the Archway Club after Laurie.
Thor, yeah.
Thor was my cousin, yeah. So there are lots of connections there. One thing I'd like you to do is to go back for me to how your parents came to come to Huntsville and their connection with
my mother came, I started to tell you now, my mother's mother had passed away when they were young. And my grandfather there was 2 girls and a boy in the family, and he brought them here. And he stayed, he got a job until they were quite young, I think my mother was 12 years old. He stayed until the 2 girls had married and the son had a job. As a matter of fact, he moved to Detroit, the car business was booming. And my aunt, when she got married, moved to Toronto. And my mother stayed here and raised the family here. And she lived till she was 80. She died of, what do they call it? She was, can't think of the word. It's to do with sugar.
Oh, diabetes.
Diabetes. She didn't know she had it. And all of a sudden one day she went into shock. She never recovered. Mm-hmm. And she was 80 years old. And they were still living down Susan Street. Meantime, my brother Lou had bought a duplex over on Duncan. And he had the half rented, but he still gave them notice because he wanted my dad to move in there. And he stayed there until he got, when he was about 92, he started to get forgetful. And so we decided he better move him into Fairburn because that was quite new then. And he spent the rest of his days over there.
Were your parents from the same place in Italy?
Yep. It was a little village, and most of the original group of Italian descendants came from this. It was a very poor area. That's why they say Shaw. There was the first man to come here, family, was a Boley. Remember the Boley family? And he sent him back. The First World War, things were booming in the leather business. They were supplying the boot leather for all the army boots. They couldn't get enough help here. So he sent them over there. And he brought back, I've forgotten, quite a bunch. And given them all jobs. And some of them were carpenters, and they built all the houses there in Susan there, so they had a place to live, and they didn't have to have a car to get to work. And they had a laundry over there. A lot of the women worked part-time in the summer. They did the laundry for all the lodges, mainly big one. And anyway, he passed away when he was 96. And that was the end of that generation.
What were some of your earliest memories growing up in Huntsville?
The school, being so close to the school, snow, no plows. That'd be part of your early morning, get out there and shovel the path. And we were a little bit fortunate in that the Muskoka Wood was on Hunter's Bay, and they used Susan Street to bring in logs, take out lumber and that. So although they didn't have a good plow, they kind of kept the road open. There was nobody drove cars in the winter anyway down there. So, but yeah, that was the first memory, and I can still remember a lot of my teachers. Especially the high school teachers there, because I spent a long time there. I kind of lost interest in school when I started playing trumpet. Matter of fact, I got a letter when I transferred to the Air Force. I had to get a letter of my marks and that from high school. And Mr. Thornton added a postscript that says, "Don't pay any attention to these marks." He says he was a good student, but when he discovered the trumpet, he forgot about school. So, but he was, I can remember there was Bessie Fenn taught French. There was a Miss Peregrine and Miss Freeman. We did funny, had Latin literature, and it was kind of tough going. And another memorable thing was that we had a school principal, Bernath, who had lost his leg, and he walked with crutches, and he had an assistant, Mrs. Stewart, who took his notes and everything else. And I had a picture once, a little snapshot of all the boy students, right from the first form up to the fifth, and there was 55 boys. Boys didn't go to school much, no, not to high school. Girls, there were mainly girls in there, but there weren't, there weren't many in school. Now they got 1,000, 1,100 students over there.
Did the church play a role in your life, a significant role in your life when you were growing up in Huntsville?
We were brought up, to go to church, and you had to be a good churchgoer because at that time it was down in the West End. It was cold going down there in the winter, and it was cold in the church because it was a stone building. They had a little furnace, but you had to keep your coat on. And it was right up, there was nobody could ever figure out why they built it up there. There was three stairs. It was right up on top of a hill, one of the highest points. But it was, in the summertime, with tourists, they couldn't cope with so they built a new one down in 1954 down in the center there.
Do you have any particular friends that you grew up with that you kept in touch with and have been part of your fabric in your life for?
Well, we kept in touch, but most of them didn't move back here. There's a few, Denny Hutchison, and there's a resident here, Bud Robinson, who were younger than I, but they were in school. We knew each other in school. But the fellows I knew, basically, some of them retired back here. But there was one, Jack Martin, whose sister, Marion, married Alan White, used to have the planing mills. She just passed away at age 100 just a couple of months ago. She was over at Rogers Cove. And her brother, he moved back here for a little while, and then his wife came from Brampton and she wanted to move back down there. But there's like Ken McDonald. We kept played together for a long time, and then kept in touch, and not too well, Jack McDonald too. And most of my acquaintances were in music, you know, in the band, and both the concert band and the dance band, and these Rotary shows, which took up 4 months every year, not for the orchestra, but for the performers. They'd start right after New Year's, and it'd take them four months to get it ready, and then the orchestra would go in there for the last couple of weeks. But we still played, you know, charity dances, stuff like that. We played all over. We went up to, I can't remember the year, but it was Dr. Sargent's, came from Sault Ste. Marie. It was his 75th high school reunion. And they hired the orchestra to go up and play for the dance. So we took a bus up, they paid for the motel, and we were supposed to play for 3 hours, but they had so many speeches, and we wound up just playing for about an hour, so it was a long trip to play 1 hour. But we enjoyed it. And we went to, they used to have band festivals down in Thornbury, and they'd have 4 dance bands, and you'd compete, just very, you know, friendly competition. In the afternoons, they would, each band would play for a half an hour, and they'd have judges mark them, you know, with singers, and then in the evening we'd play for public dancing, you know. And that was a lot of fun. We went down there for about 3 years in a row, and we met fellas, you know, that from other areas.
You spent a lot of time on the road with bands and your music, and then you got married. How did your wife accept your time away?
Well, she accepted it. We got along, so we'd go once in a while. We'd go, you know. And then we had, you know, in our first 9 years, we had 3 kids. So babysitters weren't always, yeah, well, that was when they're a little older. But we'd get out, you know. We used to go away. You know, we'd take a little trip when the kids got a little older. Later on, when they were teenagers, my brother, Tina, had a place in Florida, so we'd always get 2 or 3 weeks down there in the winter, which she loved because she liked sunning. And then we built a place on Ferry Lake. We were able to get a lot out there when they're reasonably priced, you know. And she liked going out there. She liked it's not fancy, you know, but it was right on the water. Unfortunately, last year it was too close. We got flooded out.
Eddie, I don't ever remember you driving a car.
No, I never drove. When I got out of the service, my dad still had a car, and they used to park it. There's a garage down at the bottom of our street. And the first year I was out, either Lou or Teen took him down and parked it. And he used to put it up on blocks. And they didn't put it up. In the springtime, the tires were gone, and you couldn't get any of them. So I never had nothing to practice on, so I went on and on. I just never bothered. I could always find a ride. Well, then later on, when I was married, the kids were growing up a bit. My wife learned to drive, and we had a car all the time. Well, for quite a while. Usually a second, a used car, but it was something to get around with.
To cap off here, do you have any special memories of any particular historical events, like for instance when the war ended, or some moment during the Depression, visiting dignitaries, anything along that line?
Well, I think the only dignitary was J. Frank Kelly. He spoke to you about it before. And he left his footprints here in Huntsville. He came here as a Salvation Army officer. And then shortly after that, the famous Huntsville band was going, and he was a good musician. And he wanted to get into that music, so he left his post and he took out an insurance agency. And he started playing in the band, which wasn't a full-time job, but he sold insurance. He sold the first group insurance plan that was ever sold for Metropolitan Life to the employees at the tannery there. And it proved to be a real bonanza for a lot of the older men. When the tannery closed, they still hadn't reached an old age pension. And they were able to cash them in, what they had. I know in my dad's case, it carried him for 2 years, He was 2 years from retirement. So that, and then he got into politics, and he became the mayor of town. And he was a man that later on, when he was a member of Parliament in Toronto there, he heard that that town clock was available. So he put them wires up here, and they were able to move it up here. But he did a lot, I'm surprised he didn't name the road or something for him. I told you before, while he's in government there, he got a grant for $100,000 to strengthen the road in Algonquin Park, and he put about 400 unemployed men to work for a few months, that tided them over. There was no unemployment insurance then. So he left his mark. And I guess you got the picture he brought. Was that as a mayor?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
Had the big stogie in his mouth.
And he built a house that was kind of palatial in those days. Up there, the 2-story, up on the top of the hill there. It was, it was big in those days.
Well, Eddie, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us.
Well,
your memories
anytime.
are vivid and varied, and we appreciate the time that you spent with us today.
If you ever have any other questions and I can answer them, just give me a call or drop out.